Last estimates, in reply to a question on notice from Senator Betts, the department advised that textbooks promoting violence were provided by the Palestinian Authority to UNRWA schools, and indicating that Australian aid funds haven't funded the development of these textbooks. It's nonetheless concerning that a UN agency supported by Australian taxpayers makes use of these textbooks. Has the Australian government made any representations to UNRWA, demanded of UNRWA not to use these textbooks in future upon threat of removal of Australian aid?
Yes, we are in constant engagement with UNRWA, and in particular to the material in textbook. We did actually establish that none of the Australian funds were going into purchasing textbooks, as they were being provided as in-kind contribution by the Palestinian Authority. Nonetheless, we have been engaging in UNRWA to make sure that the neutrality principle is very rigorously followed. And through that discussion, we have discovered that they do have a good framework in place. And in fact, recently, the US Government Accountability Office has reviewed the systems that UNRWA has in place that has given them an assurance that they've made huge efforts to neutralize some of this material. So there is a very small component which actually has what we would regard as rather biased in its content, and what UNRWA has done is come up with complementary material to actually neutralise that and actually take their teachers and implementers of the textbook material through rigorous training to ensure that's properly done.
The material leads to the children in UNRWA schools in one of the refugee camps that I'm aware of, chanting, "Wave the swords. This is how Muhammad taught us how to slaughter Jews." How do you neutralise that?
So it's really to try and take that material out and provide different examples that teachers can adopt. So I'm not aware of that particular example and how they may have neutralised that, Senator, but the framework allows for different examples to be introduced in situations like that, and training teachers to ensure that perhaps that's not the examples that gets used in their teaching.
Yeah. I recently became aware of some information about the Dfat refugee camp in Jerusalem, which has 30,000 residents. The information suggests it's a hotbed of recruitment and activity by both Hamas and Islamic Jihad, both of which are recognised as terrorist organisations by many countries, including Australia. Now, the people in there, because it's in Jerusalem, have the option of taking out Israeli citizenship if they wish to, but they don't. And it is an UNRWA camp. It's the information I have is that it's absolutely infested with corruption and crime. Sanitation is very poor. There are drugs, prostitution, all sorts of evil things are occurring there, including ghastly anti-Semitic activities. And this is happening on UNRWA's watch. My concern is, I suppose, is neutralising that or having frameworks in place may not be sufficient.
Thank you, Senator, for bringing that example to my attention. I was not aware. I'd be happy to look into that. And we have our staff who is actually on the ground to ensure that a lot of these things are properly implemented in line with Australian government values and Australian values. So we will make sure we look into that.
All right. Now, and the other matter that I'd like to raise with you is this issue of the Palestinian Authority, or the PLO, I think, providing financial support to convicted prisoners, detainees and their families, in particular those arrested by the Israelis for terrorist activities. And some of your argument has been that it's not Australian money which is contributing to this. My concern is that money is totally fungible. So you put money into a pot and a different piece of money is taken out somewhere else and spent on these undesirable activities, doesn't really keep out Australia's hands clean. I'm wondering whether, if you're looking into some of these activities, you might also look at that to determine whether or not we really are, one way or another, funding the payment of terrorists.
Senator, as you're aware, we have actually stopped all our payments directly to Palestinian Authority. To the extent that those payments are made by the PA through the PLO, I think we can definitely say there is no Australian money, fungibility or not, in the hands of the PA directly from Australian government.
As I recall from last estimates, our total contribution to the various Palestinian causes about 40 million, is that right?
That's correct, yes. 43 million for this year,
43
Senator.
million, yes. And how many separate recipients of that would there be?
There are actually quite a... Do you mean where we actually provide the funds to?
Yes. So the organisations or bodies or whatever that receive it, how many separate organisations are there?
There are actually quite a few. So
10, 20, 30?
It could range to around 20, but I will have to take that on notice so we can provide a proper list for you.
Yeah.
I've got some names here, but it's not a comprehensive list.
All right. And so I guess what I am inviting you to do is provide some comfort to the committee that you've looked at each of those recipients and there isn't any possibility that those funds are funding terrorist activities.
Absolutely.
I think Australian taxpayers have a right to be comfortable that their money is not going to any terrorist causes. And yes, I do appreciate the fact that funding for the PA has ceased. That's good. And it also ceased funding another organisation which I brought to your attention in previous estimates, which is also good. But it concerns me that I had to bring them to your attention. Now, if you haven't looked at those other 20 or however many there are in great scrutiny, then perhaps it might be time that you did.
Thank you for your question, Senator. We do take this extremely seriously, as you can imagine. And given the very high standard we set ourselves around ensuring no terrorist financing, even if it's by default, that we actually have a number of reviews that we actually carry out rigorously, in addition to accreditation and assessment of all the recipients of the aid. But because this is done in the Palestinian territories, we take extra measures to ensure that we actually even do spot checks, unannounced visit to sites to make sure the money is going where it's meant to be going, activities are being taken in the way that it's meant to be taken, as well as ensuring that we regularly check against a list of terrorist organisations or identified people of concern to ensure that they are actually not in any way part of the program that we run in the PT area.
All right, and finally, am I right? I didn't double check this before I came in, but am I right in saying the United States administration has withdrawn funding for UNRWA, or some funding? Is it all of it or some of it?
Yes, they have. They have withdrawn all. Yes.
All funding?
Yes, that's correct.
Has there been any consideration of doing the same thing by Australia?
Well, That's matter for government,
That's a
but
government
we
matter.
certainly have provided consistent funding to UNRWA because we recognise they provide basic services that are required by those that are in greatest need in Palestinian territories, and that has actually remained around $20 million per year for the last 3 years.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Senator Leylonhjelm.